Okay, guys, in this video, we are going to start talking about factoring by grouping. Now, this technique is actually not that easy, and a lot of people have problem with it. So I'm gonna try to go as slow as I can and just take it slow and understand all the steps. Okay, so let's start with the first problem. So you have xy plus 2y plus 5x plus 10, and we want to factor it. So what does it mean factor it? It means take this problem and see if you can write the given expression as a product of two things. So that means factor, right? So multiply two things. Okay. So the way that the problem is set up is that you should be able to figure out what is the common factor of the first two and the last two terms. And once you figure that out, you should be able to take it out or factor it out. And once you factor it out, you should see that they share a factor. So the first two and the last two share something. So let's take a look at the first two factors. What do they share? What is their GCF? So notice that xy doesn't have a number in front of it. So I guess you can always insert a 1, but 1 and 2 only share 1, right? Okay. And also the first term here has an x, but the second term does not have an x. So they're not going to share x. But what they do share is y, right? Because you have y in the first term and also y in the second term. So we can factor it out. Now let's see what will be left from the first term. So imagine that you take y out, right? So like think of crossing it out. What's left? Well, what's left is x, okay? Then we've got a plus, and from the 2y, we take out y. So again, cross that out. What you have left is 2. Okay, so that's the first two terms. Now let's take a look at the last two terms. Again, we're trying to see what they share. What is their greatest common factor? So I've got 5x and 10. Okay, well, 10 and 5 do share something other than 1. So let's list all the factors of 5 and list all the factors of 10. For 5, we've got 1 and 5 because it's a prime number. It doesn't have any other factors. For 10, we have a little bit more. So we've got 1. We have also 2 and 5, right? Because 2 times 5 is 10, and then 10 itself. Now, if we look at what they share, they obviously share 1, but that is again not interesting because any two numbers will share 1 as a factor. But they do share also 5, right? And that would be the GCF. So what that means is you can factor 5 out from this last two terms. Now let's see what happens. If you take 5 out, so you cross it out, what would be left from the first term? That would be x. Then plus, and 10, think of 10 as 2 times 5, right? So if you take 5 out, what you have left is 2. Now notice something very interesting that's happening here that should always happen when you do factoring by grouping. You should at this point see that you've got exactly the same factor in both terms, right? So you've got x plus 2 right here, and see how there is also x plus 2 over here. So that's not an accident. If that didn't happen, you really wouldn't be able to factor by grouping. Now let's see what happens when you try to factor by grouping. So what does that mean? Again, take the original expression, write it as a product of two things. And those two things are going to be what? Okay, so one of those two things is going to be what they share. So that factor that I highlighted, which is x plus 2, that's going to be over here. Okay, so we can like factor it out. And then what's left? Now to figure out what's left, what's in the other one, we basically again think cross out what they share here, and what we'll have left is y plus 5. Okay, so that's the final answer. We factored it by grouping. Now, to see if we did it right, you can always use the FOIL technique, right? So remember, when we FOIL, we do first, so that's yx or xy, so that matches the first term. Then we have outer, which is y times 2, that's 2y, so we got this term, we got this term. Then inner, which is 5 times x, and that's this term right here. And then last, 5 times 2, that's 10, so that's over here. So we can FOIL, and we see that we got the expression that we started with, which means that we did it right. Okay, so let's take a look at one more example of factoring by grouping. So let's say I have x squared plus 6x minus 7x minus 42. And I want to factor it by grouping. How do I do that? Okay, so again, we're looking at the first two terms and we're looking at the last two terms. Now note how when I was talking to you before about subtraction, I said I don't really like it. I want to write it as add a negative. So that's what I'm going to do right here. So I'm going to put plus minus 7x and over here also plus minus 42. Okay, so I'm inserting that extra plus there. Okay, so those going to be my last two terms. Negative 7x plus negative 42. Okay, so what's the process? Let's take the first two terms and see if we can factor out what they share. So they're not going to share any numbers because the first term has no number in front, which you can think of as 1, and 1 does not share anything with 6 other than itself, so that's not interesting. Now, what about x squared and x? So remember that x is the same thing as x to the power 1, and when we try to find GCF of x to some power and x to some other power, we only take the smaller of the two powers. So we're going to get x to the power 1. Right? Okay, so then if we factor x to the power 1, what would be left? Well, remember how you subtract the powers to figure out the new power. So we have x to what power? 2 minus 1 is 1. So that's just going to be x to the 1. Okay, plus. What about the second term? So we took out x to the 1. So imagine that we crossed it out. What would be left? Well, that would be a 6. Okay, now let's take a look at the second two terms. Now I'm going to tell you right away, that they have to share x plus 6. Why does that have to happen? Well, because this already has x plus 6 and that factor has to repeat. So I already know from the second expression I'm also going to have x plus 6. I just have to figure out what would be over here. So I don't know what that is going to be, but I know that here there should be, oops, that's not what I wanted. Oops, one second, sorry about that. Pressed on the wrong button. So I've got x plus 6 here, x plus 6 here. So what is that mystery number? Okay, let's take a look at the first term. So I did that plus minus, right? To make my life a little bit easier. So what I need to do is x is here, so cross that out. What's left? Negative 7. So that unknown number, that unknown mystery number right here, that should be negative 7, right? And we can check that out. We can take negative 7 multiplied by x, that's negative 7x, and negative 7 multiplied by 6, that's negative 42. So we did it. That's correct. Okay, so now that they share this x plus 6, now we're going to factor. How are we going to factor? Whatever they share, we're going to write right here. That's going to be one of our factors. And then everything else, so cross what they share, whatever is left, that's what we're going to put in the first set of parentheses. So we'll get x. You don't have to put x to the power 1, it's just x plus negative 7. Well, x plus negative 7 is the same thing as x minus 7, so that would be our final answer. Now, if you ever want to figure out, okay, I don't know, did I do this right or not, you can always do the FOIL. And the FOIL would be a check to see if you got it right. So you can do x times x, that's x squared, got it. X times 6, this is 6x, great. Negative 7 times x, negative 7x, got that. Negative 7 times 6 is negative 42, got that. So now I know that what I did is the right solution.